After my car accident, I texted my husband for help. He replied, "Can't leave lunch with Charlotte right now. Call an Uber," while I was bleeding in the ER. That's when police walked into his restaurant. I stared at Tyler's message through my cracked phone screen, my dislocated shoulder screaming with every breath. 23 words that would end our 8-year marriage, though he didn't know it yet. He was too busy comforting Charlotte Thomas over her latest manufactured crisis to realize his wife was lying in Riverside General's emergency room, choosing between rage and morphine. The nurses had asked me 3 times if they could call someone else, anyone else. But I kept reading that message over and over, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. My husband of 8 years had just suggested I take an Uber home from the emergency room after a car accident that could have killed me because Charlotte needed him more. What Tyler didn't know was that I wasn't just Hannah Wilson, the devoted wife who made his breakfast every morning. I was Hannah Wilson, senior pharmacy manager at Riverside General with 15 years of healthcare experience and a master's degree in pharmaceutical sciences. More importantly, I had connections throughout the medical community, detailed documentation habits from my professional training, and a financial independence Tyler had never bothered to investigate. My annual salary of $89,000 was deposited into my personal account that Tyler had never asked to see. My emergency fund contained $34,000 in liquid assets. My 401k held $127,000 in carefully managed investments. I'd spent 8 years letting Tyler believe I was financially dependent on his $52,000 accounting job at his father's firm. But the truth was exactly the opposite. This morning felt like a lifetime ago now. I'd stood in our kitchen at making Tyler's breakfast exactly how he liked it. 2 eggs over easy, 3 strips of bacon, wheat toast with butter. 8 years of the same routine while my mind wandered to the pharmaceutical conference dinner that night, where I'd receive my 5-year Service Excellence Award. "Charlotte's having another crisis," he'd announced over breakfast, eyes glued to his phone screen. The soft smile playing at his lips used to belong to me. Now it belonged to her text messages. "That's the 3rd crisis this month," I'd said, keeping my voice neutral while cracking eggs with perhaps more force than necessary. "Her ex is stalking her. She's scared, Hannah." Marcus, the alleged stalker, had been threatening Charlotte for 6 months, according to her. Strange how the stalking only occurred on Thursday afternoons when Tyler had his longest lunch break. Strange how it never escalated to actually calling police. I'd wanted to point out these inconsistencies, but defending Charlotte had become Tyler's religion. The Thursday lunch pattern had started innocently enough 6 months ago. Tyler brought Charlotte to my pharmacy needing anxiety medication. I'd watched from behind the counter as she touched his arm while laughing, the gesture casual and intimate. Tyler straightened his tie when she complimented it, a peacock preening for attention. "Charlotte's going through a rough divorce," he'd explained that night. "She doesn't have anyone else she can really talk to." 1 lunch became 2. Monthly became weekly. 1 hour stretched to 3. Always on Thursdays when I worked late shifts. The credit card charges at Sterling Room were consistently $200 to $300 per lunch, far too expensive for casual friends. His phone started living face down during our dinners. Our bedroom began smelling like her expensive floral perfume. Last month, I'd tried addressing it directly. "Do you think Charlotte might be taking advantage of your kindness?" Tyler had looked genuinely surprised. "Taking advantage? Hannah, she's falling apart. She has panic attacks. She needs support. She has parents 20 minutes away. She has a therapist." "But she trusts me," he'd said, as if her trust mattered more than our marriage. What Tyler failed to understand was that my 15 years in healthcare had taught me to document everything. I had copies of every credit card statement showing his $200 to $300 Thursday lunches, screenshots of his increasingly secretive phone behavior, a pattern of lies I'd been unconsciously cataloging with the same precision I used to track controlled substances at work. The morning of the accident, I'd watched Tyler prepare for his day with unusual care. He wore the burgundy tie Charlotte had complimented last week, the one I'd given him 2 Christmases ago that had lived in his closet until she mentioned how it brought out his eyes. His cologne was stronger than usual. His beard was trimmed with unusual precision. "Big meeting today?" I'd asked. "Just Thursday," he'd replied, and we both knew what that meant. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent the morning filling prescriptions for Charlotte's anxiety medication, the same medication she'd needed for 6 months of Thursday crises that never resolved, the same medication that gave her excuses to text my husband at all hours with questions about dosages and side effects. Now, lying in the emergency room with monitors beeping around me, I thought about all the Thursday nights I'd come home to find Tyler already in bed, pretending to sleep. The way he'd started keeping his phone on silent, how he'd dismiss my questions about his day with increasing irritation. Officer Janet Blake appeared at my bedside, her expression carefully professional. I recognized her immediately. She picked up her mother's blood pressure medication monthly, always chatty, always asking about my family. "Hannah." "Oh, honey, it's Janet Blake. We've been trying to reach your husband. The calls keep going straight to voicemail." He'd turned off his phone rather than risk being interrupted during lunch. The recognition settled over me like lead. Tyler had actively chosen to be unreachable, while his wife lay in the emergency room. "Officer Blake," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the medication fog. "I know exactly where my husband is. Sterling Room on 5th Street. He's at his usual table by the window with Charlotte Thomas." I paused, tasting blood where I'd bitten my lip. "Would you mind delivering the message in person? I'm worried he doesn't understand how serious this was." Janet studied my face and I saw understanding dawn. "We can certainly do that, Hannah. Sterling Room, you said?" "Every Thursday," I confirmed, "like clockwork." The accident had happened as I drove to the pharmaceutical conference dinner downtown. The rain had turned Madison Avenue into a streaming blur of brake lights and rushing water. I was thinking about what I'd say if anyone asked where Tyler was when I approached the 5th and Madison intersection. The light was green, had been green for several seconds as I coasted toward it at 25 mph, cautious in the rain. That's when I saw him. A college kid in a lifted pickup truck barreling down 5th Street like the rain didn't exist. The last coherent thought I had was that he wasn't stopping. The impact folded my car door into my ribs. Metal surrendered to metal in the rain, with a sound nothing like movies make it seem. My body moved in directions it wasn't meant to move, and suddenly the steering wheel was somewhere near my right ear, while the door pressed against my left hip in ways that made geometry stop making sense. Time did something strange then. I could see individual raindrops on what remained of my windshield, each one perfect and separate. Something warm ran into my eyes, and when I tried to wipe it away, my left arm wouldn't respond. It hung at an angle that made my stomach lurch. My wedding ring caught the streetlight through the shattered window, gold covered in red that I knew was blood but couldn't process as mine. 8 years wearing that ring, 8 years believing it meant something more than jewelry. The paramedics arrived with professional urgency I recognized from working at Riverside General. They moved with choreographed efficiency, establishing IV access, applying a cervical collar, checking airways and circulation. "Are you a medical professional?" the older paramedic asked when I correctly identified my own injuries. Dislocated shoulder, possible concussion, multiple lacerations to forehead and scalp. "Pharmacy, Riverside General," I managed. "Was supposed to be at conference dinner, 5-year award." They worked around me with practiced skill, cutting away what remained of my car door with tools that sounded like angry metal wasps. Every movement sent fire through my shoulder and ribs, but I focused on their faces, their professionalism, anything except the pain that made breathing feel impossible. At the hospital, Dr. Webb manipulated my shoulder back into place with a grinding pop that sent white lightning through my entire left side. "Clean reduction," he announced with satisfaction. "You'll be sore for weeks, but no permanent damage." Nurse Patricia, a 20-year emergency veteran, appeared at my bedside with news I already expected. "Honey, we've been trying to reach your husband. 3 attempts straight to voicemail each time." I knew exactly where he was. Could picture him at Sterling Room with his phone face down on white tablecloth, giving Charlotte his complete attention while she detailed whatever fictional crisis justified his Thursday absence. "Let me try," I said, reaching for my phone with my good hand. The screen was a spider web of cracks, but still functional. My fingers shook as I typed, whether from medication or fear, I couldn't tell. "Had an accident. I'm at Riverside General ER. Dislocated shoulder, concussion. Can you come get me?" The message showed delivered immediately. Then those 3 dots appeared, my heart doing something stupid and hopeful. He was typing. Maybe there was still a reasonable explanation that didn't involve choosing Charlotte over his injured wife. The dots disappeared and reappeared several times, like he was writing and deleting, trying to find the right words. Finally, his response arrived with a gentle vibration that had once made me smile. "Can't leave lunch with Charlotte right now. Her ex is stalking her. Call an Uber. Sorry, babe." I read it 3 times, certain the concussion was affecting my comprehension. 23 words that captured everything wrong with our marriage. The casual dismissal, the prioritization of someone else's manufactured crisis, the suggestion I handle my own emergency transportation like I'd gotten a flat tire instead of nearly died. Something structural broke inside my chest as I stared at that message. Not just my heart, but the entire framework that had held my life together for 8 years. The basic belief that when everything fell apart, Tyler would choose me, would remember the vows he'd made. Patricia was still standing there, watching my face change as I processed my husband's response. She'd probably seen this scenario play out hundreds of times. The spouse who couldn't be bothered, the emergency contact who wasn't interested in the emergency. "Is someone else coming to get you, honey?" she asked gently. I looked at Tyler's message again, sitting there like evidence in a case I hadn't realized I was building. Then I looked at Patricia's kind face that had seen too much disappointment to be surprised anymore. "No," I said, my voice strange to my own ears, "but I need to make another call." I scrolled to Officer Blake's number, still saved from when she'd given it to me months ago during pharmacy break-ins. She answered on the second ring, voice warm with concern. "Hannah, how are you doing, honey? I've been worried." "I'm stable, thank you, Janet. I have an unusual request." My voice remained steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "My husband isn't answering his phone, but I know exactly where he is. Sterling Room on 5th Street. He's at his usual table by the window with Charlotte Thomas." There was a pause while Janet processed what I was really asking. "Would it be possible for someone to notify him in person?" I continued, each word deliberate and clear. "I'm just worried he doesn't understand how serious this was." Another pause, longer this time. When Janet spoke again, her tone had shifted, carrying an understanding that made me want to cry for the first time since the accident. "We can certainly do that, Hannah. Sterling Room, you said? We'll send officers right over." "Thank you. He'll be at the table by the window with the city view. They sit there every Thursday." "Every Thursday," Janet repeated, and those 2 words carried more weight than they should have. After I hung up, I closed my eyes and pictured what was about to happen. Sterling Room with its crystal glasses and carefully folded napkins. Tyler leaning forward to catch every word of Charlotte's latest crisis. Her hand probably on his arm in that casual touch that meant everything and nothing. Then the door would open. Officers would walk in, their uniforms dark and official against all that white tablecloth elegance. Conversations would stop. Forks would pause midway to mouths. Everyone in that restaurant would turn to watch as police approached Tyler's table. Charlotte's perfectly manicured hand would fly to her mouth. Tyler's face would cycle through confusion, annoyance, then finally understanding. The silence would be complete as Officer Blake explained that his wife had been in a serious accident, that she was in the emergency room, that they'd been trying to reach him for hours. While I waited in my hospital bed, floating in medicated space between consciousness and dreams, my phone buzzed against the blanket. 3 texts in rapid succession, Tyler's name lighting up my cracked screen like a warning signal. Hannah, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it was that serious. Why didn't the hospital call more than once? Sending police was completely unnecessary and vindictive. You're being dramatic about this. 3 messages, 3 different attempts to make this my fault. The accident was serious enough to warrant an apology, but not serious enough to leave lunch. The hospital should have tried harder, as if 3 calls to voicemail weren't sufficient. Sending police was vindictive, not a necessary response to his deliberate unavailability. And finally, the crown jewel. I was being dramatic. My good hand trembled as I set the phone aside without responding. What was there to say? That a dislocated shoulder and head trauma weren't dramatic enough. That his wife bleeding in an emergency room should have waited patiently for Charlotte's crisis to resolve. The curtain around my bed rustled, and David walked in looking like he'd driven through hell to get here. My younger brother still wore his real estate showing clothes, crisp blue shirt and khakis that made him look trustworthy to buyers, though now wrinkled and rain-spotted. His face, usually set in an easy smile that sold houses and charmed clients, was carved from stone. 2 hours, he said, crossing to my bedside in 3 quick strides. 2 hours I've been driving, worried sick about my sister. His hand found mine, gentle despite the anger radiating from him. Then I get here, and the nurse tells me your husband suggested you take an Uber home. David, no. Hannah, just no. He pulled the visitor's chair close, never letting go of my hand. Show me the messages. I handed him my phone, watching his face transform as he read Tyler's texts. The progression was theatrical, disbelief, anger, then something colder and more calculated that I recognized from his business dealings. This was David in acquisition mode, except instead of property, he was calculating Tyler's complete removal from my life. 8 years, he muttered, still scrolling. 8 years I've watched him treat you like staff instead of a wife. But this is next-level selfishness. He pulled out his own phone, fingers flying across the screen with practiced efficiency. I'm calling Rodriguez, the locksmith. He owes me a favor. Can have your locks changed by tomorrow morning. David, I don't know if... And Reliable Moving Company. They specialize in quick extractions, divorce situations, domestic problems. Very discreet, very professional. The speed of it made my head spin more than the concussion. It's been 8 years, David. I can't just what? Demand basic human decency from your husband? Expect him to show up when you're in the hospital? His voice softened slightly, but his fingers never stopped typing. Hannah, he chose lunch with another woman over your medical emergency. There's no coming back from that. My phone buzzed again. Not Tyler this time, but an Instagram notification. Charlotte Thomas had sent me a message. I almost didn't open it, too exhausted for whatever drama she wanted to share, but curiosity won. The message was longer than expected, and reading it felt like watching the final piece of Tyler's carefully constructed image crumble. Hannah, I'm mortified by what happened today. When the police arrived at our lunch, I was shocked Tyler hadn't left immediately after your text. I asked him why he didn't go to you right away. I paused, vision swimming before continuing. He said you were always exaggerating things for attention, that you were probably fine and just trying to manipulate him into leaving. Even after the officers explained about the accident, he kept insisting you were being dramatic. I've never been so disgusted with someone in my life. David was reading over my shoulder now, his expression darkening with each word. I had no idea you were actually hurt. He made it sound like you had a fender bender and were making it bigger than it was. I'm so sorry for unknowingly participating in this. Tyler is no longer welcome in my life. I hope you recover quickly and find the support you deserve. The message sat there, like evidence in a trial I hadn't realized was happening. Tyler had not only dismissed my accident to me, but actively portrayed me as manipulative and attention-seeking to Charlotte. Even when uniformed officers explained I was in the emergency room with significant injuries, he'd maintained the fiction that I was being dramatic. "Send me that screenshot," David said quietly. "Rodriguez can be there at tomorrow. Reliable moving by noon. How do you feel about formal notice drafted by my lawyer friend, delivered by certified mail?" I looked at my brother, this man who'd driven 2 hours without hesitation when I needed him, who was now architecting my marriage's dissolution with the same precision he used to close real estate deals. He hadn't once said, "I told you so," though he'd warned me about Tyler years ago. "He'll say I'm overreacting," I said, though the words felt hollow. "Let him. While he's saying it, his belongings will be in boxes, and the locks will be changed." David squeezed my hand gently. "Hannah, he showed you exactly who he is today. When you needed him most, he chose someone else. That's not a husband. That's just some guy you happen to live with." I thought about Tyler at Sterling Room, how his Thursday routine had been more important than his wife's emergency, how he'd characterized me to Charlotte, painting me as hysterical and manipulative to justify his absence, how even now, after police notification and public humiliation, he was still trying to make this my fault. "Call Rodriguez," I said, my voice steady despite everything. 8 o'clock tomorrow." David nodded, already pulling up the contact. "And reliable moving. Everything of his packed and ready." My brother smiled for the first time since walking in, though it wasn't happy. It was the smile of someone watching justice arrive, even dressed in heartbreak and hospital gowns. "I'll handle everything," he said, and I knew he would. While Tyler was probably still at Sterling Room trying to salvage his dignity in front of Charlotte and restaurant patrons who'd witnessed his public shaming, David was dismantling the life we'd built together with surgical precision. My phone buzzed once more. Tyler, again. "We need to talk about this like adults." I looked at the message, then at David, then at my wedding ring, still covered in dried blood from the accident. 8 years reduced to this moment, this hospital bed, this decision that wasn't really a decision at all. Tyler had made the choice for both of us when he typed those 23 words suggesting I take an Uber home. At exactly the next morning, Rodriguez arrived with a toolbox that looked like it had seen 1,000 relationship endings. His weathered face carried the expression of someone who'd learned not to ask questions about why locks needed changing on a Friday morning. "David Wilson's sister?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "I'll have you secured in about an hour. New deadbolts, new door handles, even changing that back door lock you probably forgot existed." Reliable moving arrived at earlier than expected. 3 people in matching blue shirts who moved through the house with efficiency that came from practice. The team leader, Rosa, handed me an inventory sheet. "We'll photograph everything before packing, document any existing damage, treat every item with care regardless of whose it is. Professional and neutral, that's our policy." They worked with methodical precision. The Rolex I'd saved 6 months to buy him, he'd worn it twice. Golf clubs that cost more than my car maintenance, justified as networking equipment. The signed baseball in its display case, supposedly valuable, definitely never touched. Each item they packed felt like evidence in a case I hadn't realized I'd been building. The expensive things I'd bought trying to make him happy. The hobbies he'd started and abandoned, leaving costly equipment to gather dust. The designer clothes that cost more than my monthly student loan payment. Mrs. Chen appeared at my door around carrying soup that smelled like comfort and motherhood. She was 73, had lived in the neighborhood 40 years, and had opinions about everyone she usually kept to herself. "I saw the locksmith," she said, setting the soup on my coffee table. "About time, if you ask me. That man never deserved you." She settled into the chair across from me with careful movements. "That woman with the white BMW. She's been coming by Tuesday afternoons when you're at work. Stays for an hour or two." Charlotte drove a white BMW. Tuesday afternoons, I always worked late, preparing for Wednesday inventory. The information clicked into place like a combination lock finding its numbers. How long? Maybe 3 months. I didn't want to say anything without being sure, and then I wasn't sure how to bring it up. It's okay, Mrs. Chen. Thank you for telling me. She patted my good hand. I brought divorce soup, my mother's recipe, fed it to myself 40 years ago when I left Mr. Chen. Best decision I ever made. By noon, our townhouse was transformed. 63 boxes lined the entryway, each labeled with Tyler's name and contents. The walls showed pale rectangles where his pictures had hung. The closet looked cavernous with just my clothes. The bathroom counter suddenly had space for my things instead of being crammed into one corner. "This needs your signature," David said, presenting formal notice his lawyer friend had drafted. It was beautiful in its simplicity. No emotion, no accusations, just facts. Tyler's belongings were packed. He had 48 hours to collect them. The locks had been changed. Any attempt at direct contact would be considered harassment. I signed with my good hand, the pen awkward but manageable. It felt like signing discharge papers for a patient who'd been taking up space too long. "I'll have this delivered by certified mail," David said. "He'll get it today." Rosa approached with her final inventory sheet. 63 boxes total, everything photographed and documented. We can store them if they're not picked up within the specified time frame. 63 boxes, 8 years of Tyler's presence, reduced to a number on a moving company's form. The doorbell camera alert came at Saturday afternoon. Tyler stood on the doorstep looking like someone had removed his batteries. His usually perfect hair stuck up at odd angles. Yesterday's work shirt was wrinkled and untucked. Behind him, Eleanor Wilson emerged from her black Mercedes, mouth set in a line so tight it could have been drawn with a ruler. "They're here," I told David, who immediately stood behind me to watch the small screen. Through the camera's audio, I could hear their conversation. "Just ring it, Tyler." She changed the locks. "She's not going to answer." Then we used the intercom. "Stand up straight. You look pathetic." Eleanor pressed the doorbell with one manicured finger. After 30 seconds, she pressed the intercom button, her voice crackling through with the same tone she'd used at family dinners when asking housekeepers to clear plates. "Hannah, this is Eleanor Wilson. We're here to collect Tyler's belongings, as specified in your notice. Please confirm the items are ready for removal." Not, "How are you feeling after your accident?" Not, "I'm sorry this happened." Just business, which was honestly more honest than she'd been in 8 years of pretending I was good enough for her son. David reached over and pressed the respond button. "Mrs. Wilson, this is David, Hannah's brother. The boxes are in the entryway. The door will unlock remotely. Please complete removal within 30 minutes. The whole process took 22 minutes. 8 years of accumulation, 22 minutes of removal. Tyler made trip after trip to the Mercedes, each one seeming to take something out of him. On his third trip, he stopped at a box labeled wedding photos and stared at it for a full minute, shoulders slumping in a way I'd never seen. "Tyler, we don't have all day." Eleanor's sharp voice cut through whatever moment he was having. "Charlotte has been calling you repeatedly." Charlotte. Even now, even during this, she was still the priority. On his 15th trip, Tyler stopped at a small box labeled Miscellaneous Personal and opened it right there in the entryway. I could see him pull out something small, his college ring maybe, or cufflinks his grandfather had left him. He stood there holding whatever it was, shoulders shaking slightly. "Tyler." Eleanor's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "This is neither the time nor the place for dramatics." Dramatics. The same word he'd used about my accident. Must have been a family favorite. Pulled out whenever emotions threatened to make things inconvenient. When they finished, Eleanor reached for the intercom one last time. "The items have been collected. Tyler wanted me to tell you he left his house key on the kitchen counter last week." Last week? Before the accident, he'd already been pulling away, probably planning his exit strategy while I worked extra shifts and made his breakfast. They left without another word, the Mercedes pulling away with 63 boxes of Tyler's life crammed into trunk and back seat. I watched until the car disappeared, taking with it 8 years I'd never get back, but no longer wanted. 2 weeks later, my coworker Melissa texted, "You'll never guess who I saw last night. Your ex at O'Malley's bar downtown, absolutely plastered, telling everyone you overreacted to a fender bender. Said Charlotte was having a mental health crisis and needed him more. The bartender cut him off when he started crying into his whiskey." The same man who'd suggested I take an Uber from the emergency room was now crying into cheap whiskey about being misunderstood. He actually said Charlotte was suicidal, Melissa's next text read. Like that justified everything. But get this, my cousin works at Charlotte's firm. She's been posting beach photos from Cabo all week. Some mental health crisis. So Charlotte had fled to Mexico rather than deal with the fallout of Tyler's availability. The woman whose endless crises had demanded his immediate attention every Thursday had disappeared the moment she could actually have him. A month later, Tyler's father, Richard, walked into my pharmacy. He looked older than I remembered, his usually perfect suit rumpled, exhaustion in his eyes that came from disappointment rather than lack of sleep. "Your blood pressure medication?" I asked, pulling up his profile with professional neutrality. "Yes." The doctor increased the dosage. "Stress, you understand." I did understand. Tyler had been making mistakes at his father's firm, lost 3 major clients in 2 weeks by missing meetings, submitting error-filled reports, showing up late and disheveled. "Tyler's been struggling," Richard said quietly while I prepared his prescription. "He calls in sick every Thursday now, says he can't face that day of the week, and Charlotte, she won't return his calls. Changed her number, apparently." Every Thursday, the day that had been sacred for their lunches, was now the day Tyler couldn't function. He finally understood what it felt like to be abandoned by someone you thought cared about you. "That must be difficult." I maintained the same tone I used with any customer discussing personal problems. "He's been driving past the accident site," Richard added. "The intersection where it happened. His mother thinks he's punishing himself." I handed him the prescription bag. "Will that be all today, Mr. Wilson?" He nodded, understanding the boundary I'd drawn. 6 months transformed more than just my living space. The dinner party sprawled through my townhouse, colleagues from the pharmacy, neighbors including Mrs. Chen, book club friends Tyler had called intellectually pedestrian, and David manning the kitchen with confidence of someone who actually enjoyed cooking. I'd served dinner on mismatched plates I'd found at thrift stores. None of them matched, but somehow they looked perfect together. Tyler would have been mortified. I found them delightful. Everyone laughed with genuine, belly-deep laughter that had been absent from this house for years. No one worried about appearing sophisticated. No one checked their watches. No one mentioned Charlotte or Tyler or Thursday lunches. The next morning, I had my final follow-up with Dr. Webb at Riverside General. He manipulated my shoulder through its full range of motion, nodding with satisfaction. "Perfect recovery," he announced. "The scars are barely visible. Another few months and you probably won't see them at all." "They don't bother me," I said, meaning it. Those scars were proof of survival, evidence of the moment everything changed. "You know," Dr. Webb said, his expression shifting from professional to personal, "I went through something similar 5 years ago. Not a car accident, but a moment when trauma revealed what was already broken. My ex-wife brought divorce papers to the hospital when I was recovering from emergency surgery. That's awful. I thought so at the time, but looking back, that surgery didn't end my marriage. It just exposed what had been dying for years while we both pretended everything was fine. Sometimes it takes a collision to show us we've been living in wreckage all along." His words stayed with me as I drove home, taking a route I'd been avoiding for 6 months. The intersection of 5th and Madison looked different in daylight. Busier, more ordinary than the site of personal catastrophe it had become in my memory. I stopped at the red light, the same light the college kid had run that night. The intersection was just pavement and painted lines. No evidence of the accident remained. When the light turned green, I didn't move immediately. Instead, I thought about that kid who'd changed everything by running this light. I'd learned from the police report that he'd been racing to meet friends. His insurance covered everything. He'd sent a letter apologizing profusely, saying he'd have nightmares forever. I'd wanted to write back to tell him his recklessness had accidentally saved me, that his inability to stop at a red light had forced me to stop accepting less than I deserved. But how do you thank someone for nearly killing you? How do you explain that their worst moment became your liberation? Thursday afternoon arrived without fanfare. I'd worked my usual shift, come home to my quiet townhouse, changed into comfortable clothes Tyler would have called frumpy. No elaborate dinner to prepare, no watching the clock. Just me, a cup of tea, and a book I'd bought because the cover was pretty. The book was a mystery novel, the kind Tyler had dismissed as commercial fiction for people who don't really read. I was absorbed in chapter 12 when my phone buzzed. David's name appeared. "Just checking in. You doing okay?" I looked around my townhouse at the mismatched plates drying in the rack. Throw pillows I'd chosen because they were soft instead of stylish, walls decorated with photos that made me smile instead of impressed visitors. Simple curtains I'd sewn myself replaced the expensive blinds Tyler had insisted we needed. "You know what?" I typed back. For the first time in years, genuinely, yes. "Good. Want to grab dinner Sunday, that new Thai place near you?" Sounds perfect. I set the phone aside and returned to my book, tucking my feet under me on the couch that was now entirely mine. Outside, I could hear kids playing, their laughter carrying through open windows. Normal neighborhood sounds that had always been there. But I'd been too busy managing Tyler's moods to notice. The Thursday afternoon stretched ahead, empty of obligations or anxiety. No wondering when Tyler would come home. No preparing explanations for why dinner was simple or why I was tired. No checking my phone to see if Charlotte's crisis would extend his absence. Just peace earned through pain, but worth every moment of the journey that brought me here. I thought about Tyler occasionally, the way you think about a movie you once watched but can't quite remember the ending. He existed now in past tense, a character from a different story I'd closed and shelved with no interest in rereading. My shoulder barely ached anymore, just occasional stiffness when weather changed. The scars on my forehead had faded to thin lines that looked like worry marks, evidence of life lived rather than trauma survived. Everything had healed, bones, skin, and finally the parts of me I hadn't realized were broken until they started mending. I turned the page, settling deeper into the couch, and smiled at nothing in particular. It was Thursday afternoon. I was alone, and I was happy. Genuinely, completely, peacefully happy. The architecture of my new life was simple but solid, built on foundations I'd chosen rather than inherited, decorated with joy rather than obligation. This was what freedom felt like, not dramatic or triumphant, just quiet and true and entirely mine.